I stood there frozen, my suitcase by my side, as my only son pulled away without a second glance. "There's no space in the car for you, Mom," he said, flat, final, like I was nothing. After raising him alone, working overtime to pay his tuition, bailing him out of debt more than once, I was no longer family, just an inconvenience. So I opened my will, grabbed a red pen, and made sure there was no space for him in my future. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. The morning began with a faint crispness, the kind of early autumn chill that hinted the beach season was ending. Helen wheeled her suitcase down the front steps, its tiny plastic wheels clattering against the wood. She had risen early, dressed in pressed navy slacks and a light sweater, even dabbed on blush the way she used to before heading into the bank. The trip meant more to her than she had admitted aloud. A weekend with her son, his wife, and her granddaughter, her small hope of belonging again. The black SUV gleamed in the driveway like a polished monument. Jason, her only child, tugged at the straps securing a bulging carrier atop the roof. His movements were brisk, efficient, but impatient, as though the task itself insulted him. The faint tang of sunscreen drifted from the open rear door, mingling with the sharp synthetic scent of leather seats. "Jason," Helen said lightly, lifting her suitcase. "I'm ready," he straightened, sunglasses reflecting the sun so sharply she couldn't see his eyes. "Mom, there's no space in the car for you," he said, voice flat, clipped, like he was stating a fact instead of breaking her heart. He flicked a hand toward the luggage crammed behind the back seat. Helen blinked, gripping the suitcase handle tighter. "No space?" Tara's voice slid in before Jason could answer. She leaned from the passenger seat, iced coffee sweating in her manicured hand, her polished nails tapping the cup. "We're packed tight," she said, her tone smooth but dismissive. "Maybe next time." The words landed harder than they should have. Helen wasn't naive. She knew Tara had never welcomed her presence on family outings. But hearing it spoken so cleanly, so carelessly, pressed an invisible weight against her chest. Helen stayed planted on the pavement, the cool breeze biting her cheeks, the faint hum of the SUV's idling engine vibrating through her shoes. She wanted to speak, to insist, to remind her son she had once made room for him in every corner of her life. Birthday parties, tuition, his first apartment when he couldn't pay rent. Instead, silence stretched around her like a rope she couldn't cut. From the back seat, Lily's face appeared. Her granddaughter's palms flattened against the window, eyes soft and guilty. For a heartbeat, it was just the two of them locked in that silent gaze. The teenager silently pleading for forgiveness she didn't owe. Helen forced a small smile, just enough for Lily to see, before Jason shifted into gear. The SUV rolled forward, tires crunching over gravel, the engine's low growl swallowing the stillness of the neighborhood. Helen watched the taillights flare red once at the stop sign before they turned out of sight, leaving nothing but drifting leaves and the hollow echo of her own heartbeat. Her suitcase stood beside her like an abandoned companion. The street was still, except for the faint barking of a neighbor's dog and the scent of someone's chimney smoke drifting lazily overhead. Helen swallowed hard, straightened her back, and dragged the suitcase across the porch. Inside, the house greeted her with silence. No voices, no laughter, just the soft tick of the clock on the mantel. She let the suitcase drop by the door, its thud sounding final, like a gavel struck in an empty courtroom. Her steps carried her toward the oak cabinet in the corner. She opened the drawer, fingers brushing across photo albums, stacks of envelopes, and finally the smooth leather spine of the binder labeled Estate. The binder was heavy, its weight anchoring her trembling hands. Helen set it down on the dining table. The leather reflected her face faintly in the afternoon light, her features sharper, her eyes harder than they'd been just an hour earlier. She ran her palm across the cover, then flipped it open to the neatly organized documents inside. Wills, trusts, signatures that mapped every piece of her life's work. Jason had said there was no space for her in his car. She stared at the page where his name was printed in bold letters, sole heir to everything she had built. Her lips pressed into a thin, steady line. If he thought she was too much baggage for a simple trip, then she would show him how much space he truly had in her future. Helen reached for a red pen from the kitchen drawer. Its cap clicked open, sharp and decisive. She hovered for a second, then drew a slow, unshaking circle around her son's name. The ink bled into the page, a bright warning of what was coming. The chill in her chest hardened into resolve. He had shut her out, and now it was her turn. The dining table was still cluttered with the leather binder she had dragged from the cabinet, its presence commanding the room like a silent witness. The late afternoon sun angled through the blinds, casting sharp lines across the paperwork. Dust motes swirled in the golden light, dancing slowly, as if mocking her with their freedom to drift wherever they pleased. Helen eased the binder open and began laying out the sheets one by one. Trust documents, account balances, property deeds. Her hands were steady now, not shaking like they had been in the driveway. The only sound was the faint rustle of paper against wood, punctuated by the tick of the mantel clock. There it was, Jason Morris. His name appeared again and again, bolded and underlined. Sole heir to every account she had built over a lifetime of work. The words blurred for a moment as anger rose, hot and tight in her throat. She had sacrificed evenings and weekends at the bank, balanced numbers until her vision swam, all to ensure Jason's future was secure. And now, in his own words, there was no space for her. Her phone buzzed. The vibration rattled against the wood. Helen picked it up, expecting silence, but saw a message flash across the screen. Lily? Sorry, I wanted you there. Helen's chest ached at the small apology. Her granddaughter's words were like a hand slipping through the fog. She typed back quickly, "It's okay, sweetheart. Don't worry about me." She set the phone down, but the truth pressed in heavier than ever. It wasn't okay. Not at all. Helen reached for a red pen from the ceramic cup by the fridge. She clicked it open, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen, and lowered it to the paper. Her breath steadied, her grip firm. With a deliberate stroke, she circled Jason's name where it appeared on the inheritance line. The ink spread into the page, a scarlet ring of rejection. She sat back for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the house around her. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee grounds and lemon cleaner, the same scents she had lived with for years. They should have been comforting. Tonight, they felt sterile, like the smell of an office where hard decisions were made. Helen whispered into the silence, "Not anymore." The words weren't dramatic, but they anchored her. She wasn't erasing Jason out of pettiness. She was protecting herself, protecting what mattered, and perhaps, in time, protecting Lily too. She sifted through the papers again, her eyes narrowing at account balances and trust allocations. Jason had no idea how much he stood to gain or lose. His arrogance had blinded him to the simplest truth. Respect was worth more than money. And he had spent his last ounce of it in that driveway. Helen's phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Lily. A message from Tara flashed across the screen. "Stop making everything about you." Helen's lip curled. Her daughter-in-law had no idea what she was setting in motion. No idea that the binder spread across the table was now a battlefield, and Helen had already chosen her side. The red ink still glistened faintly on Jason's name. Helen pressed the pen to the paper again, this time striking through his name with a firm line. It felt like severing a cord, one that had bound her to constant disappointment. The room seemed to grow quieter after that, as if even the walls understood the finality of what she had just done. Helen drew in a slow breath and straightened her back. Her face in the darkened kitchen window was different now, less weary, more resolved. The decision was made. Now it needed to be executed. Helen reached for her phone once more, scrolling past Tara's message, past Lily's small apology, until she landed on the contact she hadn't used in years, Michael Abrams, attorney at law. His number was still there, tucked away from the last time she'd updated her estate. She pressed the call button. The phone rang, each buzz slicing the silence. Helen's eyes never left the papers on the table as she waited. This wasn't about family anymore. It was about legacy. Michael Abrams's office was tucked into the corner of a quiet strip mall, the kind of low brick building people drove past without noticing. Inside, however, the place carried the precision of a man who valued order. The air smelled faintly of cedar polish and fresh paper, the carpet thick underfoot. Law books lined the shelves behind his desk, their spines neatly aligned, and a framed photo of a sailboat at sea hung on the wall, an image of calm in a room built for strategy. Helen sat in the high-backed leather chair opposite him, her estate binder open like a patient awaiting surgery. Michael, a tall man in his 40s with calm gray eyes, adjusted his glasses and looked over the spread of papers she had carried in. "So," he said evenly, his voice low but firm, "tell me why you want to make these changes." "Start from the beginning." Helen hesitated only for a moment before the words spilled out. "They left me standing in my own driveway with a suitcase in my hand. Jason told me there wasn't space in his car for me." Her throat tightened as she spoke, but her voice didn't break. "That told me everything I needed to know. If there's no space for me in his life, then there's no space for him in my estate." Michael leaned back, fingers steepled. His gaze was steady, not sympathetic in a hollow way, but assessing, as though measuring the weight of her resolve. "Then let's retire him from your estate," he said at last. The phrase was clinical, but the steel beneath it made Helen's chest lift with something close to relief. She nodded once, firmly. "Erase him completely. He's undeserving." Michael drew a fresh legal pad toward him, uncapped his pen, and began outlining. "We'll start by revoking the current will. Draft a new one with your signatures and 2 witnesses here in the office. I'll also recommend a no contest clause. If Jason tries to fight this in court, he risks losing everything automatically." Helen's lips twitched into something resembling a smile for the first time in days. "That sounds airtight." Michael tapped the pen against the pad. "Now, as for beneficiaries, who do you want named?" The question hung in the air. Helen pictured Lily's hand pressed to the window of that SUV, eyes full of apology she shouldn't have had to give. Her granddaughter's loyalty had shone brighter than both her parents combined. "Lily," Helen said softly. "She's the only one who's shown me loyalty. She's young, but she has a heart they'll never understand." Michael nodded, jotting it down. "We can structure it so she inherits when she turns 25. Until then, the estate is protected in trust. That way, Jason and Tara can't manipulate her into handing it over early." The thought steadied Helen. She imagined Lily in her 20s, perhaps independent, maybe at college, free from the grasp of parents who thought only of themselves. Michael kept scribbling, then paused. "Anything else you want to do with the estate?" Helen glanced at the binder's other documents, accounts, property deeds, bonds. She thought about her years at the bank, the elderly, customers she had helped, people who worried about being forgotten once their usefulness had run dry. The idea struck her suddenly, sharp and undeniable. "I want a portion redirected," she said, surprising even herself. "A senior travel fund. For people who deserve more than to be left behind." Michael's brow lifted, but he smiled faintly. "That's poetic and generous. We'll make it happen." Helen exhaled, the first deep breath she had taken all day. For the first time, her binder no longer looked like a burden. It looked like a weapon sharpened against cruelty. Michael closed the pad. "I'll prepare the drafts. We'll sign within the week. Once that's done, Jason's claim disappears, like he was never written in at all." Helen closed the binder and rose to her feet. Her body still ached from the sting of rejection, but standing in Michael's tidy office, she felt taller than she had in years. As she stepped into the late evening air, her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her bag, expecting a message from Lily. Instead, Tara's name flashed across the screen. "Stop making everything about you." Helen's hand tightened around the phone. The autumn wind carried the faint smell of asphalt and exhaust, stinging her nose. She smiled coldly. Tara had no idea how much Helen had already set in motion. Helen had just poured herself a cup of tea when the phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed Jason's name across the screen, bold and unavoidable. Her stomach tightened, but she swiped to answer, the steam from the mug curling against her face as if warning her to brace. "Mom," Jason's voice came quick, casual, like they hadn't left her standing on the driveway days before. "Listen, could you cover gas for the next trip? Prices are ridiculous right now." Helen stared at the slow swirl of steam rising from her tea. Her silence stretched long enough that Jason cleared his throat on the other end. "I thought there wasn't space for me," she said finally, her tone cool, almost flat. Jason chuckled, a sound that wasn't light but edged with impatience. "Mom, you're reading too much into it. It was just logistics. Don't take it so personally." Her eyes drifted to the estate binder still spread across the table. The red ink marking his name had bled faintly through the page, like a wound that refused to close. Then Tara's voice chimed in faintly over the speaker, sharp as glass. "We're family. Family helps. That's all we're asking." Helen's lips pressed into a thin line. She slid open the drawer beside her chair, pulled out the small silver recorder she had kept since her banking days, and pressed the button. The faint click filled her own ears like a drumbeat. "Funny," she said evenly, "how family only asks when it benefits them." Jason let out a small exhale, the kind that betrayed his irritation more than his words. "Mom, come on, don't make this difficult." She didn't answer, letting the silence hang, letting the recorder capture every sigh, every half-truth. Her tea had cooled, but the heat inside her chest grew sharper with each passing second. When the call finally ended, Helen set the phone down with steady hands. She pressed stop on the recorder, replaying the last few seconds. Their voices filled the kitchen again, hollow and greedy, now preserved like evidence sealed in an envelope. The house around her was quiet, except for the distant tick of the clock. She reached for her phone again, tempted to text Lily, but before she could, it vibrated on its own. "Lily? Grandma, don't give them anything, please." Helen's chest warmed at the message. She pictured Lily typing it in secret, glancing over her shoulder so her parents wouldn't see. She whispered back into the empty room, though she didn't type it, "Don't worry, sweetheart, I won't." She carried her tea to the living room window, watching the glow of porch lights blink on across the neighborhood. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk in the cool breeze, the season shifting just as her resolve had. They had taken her kindness for granted, mistaking it for weakness. Tonight, she had proof otherwise. The shrill ring of her phone cut into the stillness. Helen jumped, nearly spilling her tea, then snatched it up. The caller ID wasn't Jason this time. It was Michael Abrams. She answered quickly. "Mrs. Morris," Michael said, his tone calm but weighted with purpose. "Your new will is ready to sign. I've prepared everything we discussed. It's airtight." Helen's grip on the phone tightened. The smell of her cooling tea, bitter and faintly floral, lingered in the air. She looked back at the estate binder on her table, at the red circle around Jason's name. Her reflection in the glass window showed a woman older, yes, but no longer waiting to be included. "Good," she said, her voice firm. "It's time." And this time, it wasn't Jason pulling away from her. It was Helen leaving him behind. The conference room smelled faintly of cedar and ink, a mix of old furniture and fresh contracts. Sunlight streamed through the blinds in tidy stripes, falling across the glossy mahogany table where the new documents lay in a neat stack. The weight of them was almost physical, as though her entire past had been condensed into sheets of thick paper waiting for her signature. Helen sat with her estate binder closed at her elbow, the familiar leather replaced now with something sharper, more deliberate. Michael Abrams leaned forward across the table, his sleeves rolled up, his pen poised like a conductor ready to start the final movement. Everything's here, Michael said, sliding the top page toward her. This revokes your old will completely. Jason and Tara are removed in full. Lily is named as the sole beneficiary of your estate when she turns 25. Until then, it's protected in trust. And per your request, part of your assets will fund the Morris Senior Travel Fund. The name alone made Helen's chest lift. Not Jason's name, hers. A fund designed for seniors who deserve to see the world, not to be left behind on their own driveways. Helen studied the page, her fingers brushing the crisp edge. For a moment, she could almost see Jason's face there in the print, cocky and dismissive, telling her there was no space. She felt her grip tighten around the pen. Michael watched her with calm steadiness. Take your time, but know this. Once you sign, it's done. Airtight. They can scream, but they can't undo it. Helen drew in a slow breath. Her heart thumped loud enough she could hear it in her ears. Then, with a firm, deliberate stroke, she signed her name at the bottom of the first page. The ink bled dark and final, a stroke that severed 37 years of disappointment. She didn't stop there. She turned the page and the next, signing each line with growing certainty. By the 5th signature, her hand no longer trembled. By the 8th, her chest felt lighter. With the last flourish of her pen, it was finished. Helen exhaled, the sound sharp in the quiet room. It wasn't just breath leaving her lungs. It was the weight of being overlooked, dismissed, treated as baggage. She slid the pen across the table. Michael gathered the documents carefully, tapping them into a crisp stack. He smiled faintly. It's airtight. They won't see it coming. Helen leaned back in her chair, shoulders settling into a posture she hadn't felt in years. For once, she wasn't waiting on Jason's approval or Tara's opinion. She had carved her own justice, line by line. She glanced at Michael. Let him try to contest it. I'll be waiting. Michael chuckled softly, not in mockery, but in respect. With this structure, if he contests, he forfeits. He won't just lose, you'll win twice. The idea sent a flicker of satisfaction through Helen's chest. For the first time since the driveway, she felt not just hurt, but powerful. The rest of the meeting flowed with details. Where the trust would be kept, how the travel fund would be launched, when Lily would have access to her inheritance. Helen listened carefully, nodding, her mind already picturing her granddaughter someday standing proudly beside a plaque bearing her grandmother's name. When everything was wrapped, Helen closed the binder she'd carried in. It no longer felt like a weight of the past. It felt like a blade she had sharpened and wielded to cut free. Michael walked her to the door, shaking her hand firmly. You did the right thing. As Helen stepped out into the cool air, her phone buzzed in her purse. She expected it to be Michael confirming a detail, or perhaps Lily with another small message of loyalty. She pulled it free, and her chest tightened. Lily. Grandma. Mom's snooping in your desk. Helen stopped on the sidewalk, the afternoon sun glaring hot against her face. The signatures were fresh, the ink barely dry, and already the threat was closer than she expected. She slid her keys into her palm, drove home without delay, and pushed open the front door with a sharper force than usual. The scent of her house, lemon cleaner, faint lavender from the diffuser, was interrupted by the sound of faint rummaging upstairs. Helen's footsteps were quiet but deliberate as she climbed, each creak of the banister announcing her presence. She found Tara in the study. The younger woman was crouched at Helen's desk, a stack of envelopes carelessly displaced, the bottom drawer half open. Tara's hair fell over her shoulder as she rifled through papers, her manicured nails flicking aside receipts and old letters as though searching for something specific. Tara. Helen's voice carried no tremor, just the cool bite of disapproval. Tara froze for a moment before turning slowly, a smile snapping into place like a mask. Oh, Helen! I was just looking for stamps. Thought I saw a roll last week when you were paying bills. Helen crossed the room and shut the drawer with a firm push. My legal papers aren't stamps, she said evenly, her eyes locking on Tara's. For a split second, the mask slipped. Tara's lips pressed thin, and her gaze flickered toward the desk as though wishing she had a few seconds longer. Then the smile returned. Well, you know how Jason and I are always running errands. I figured I'd save you the trouble. Helen didn't reply. She simply gathered the scattered envelopes into a neat stack, her movements calm but deliberate, the way she used to straighten deposits at the bank before sliding them into the vault. The silence pressed down harder than any accusation. Tara shifted on her heels, the faint citrus scent of her perfume cutting through the musty paper smell of the room. Anyway, she said finally, her voice light but strained, I'll let you get back to it. She brushed past Helen, her heels tapping against the hard wood as she disappeared down the hall. Helen waited till the sound of the front door shutting echoed through the house. Then she sat at her desk, staring at the drawer Tara had been digging through. Her fingers tapped once, twice, before she pulled open the bottom drawer herself. Nothing had been taken, yet, but the intrusion was clear. Tara was hunting. That night, Helen gathered every new document Michael had prepared. The fresh will, the travel fund paperwork, the trust papers for Lily, and stacked them carefully inside a folder. She placed them into her tote, the leather creaking softly under the weight. The air outside was sharp with autumn chill as she drove to Michael's office after hours, her headlights cutting across the darkened parking lot. Michael met her at the door, still in his rolled sleeves. I'll keep these in the safe deposit box, he assured, sliding the folder into a locked case. No one will touch them but me. Helen exhaled slowly. Good. They're desperate. I can see it. Michael nodded. Desperation makes people sloppy, which works in our favor. Back home, Helen found Lily waiting on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. Grandma, Lily whispered once they were inside. They're desperate. Dad keeps muttering about money. Mom's worse. I can see it in how they look at your things. Helen rested a hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. Good, she said softly, with a steadiness Lily hadn't expected. Desperation is evidence. And evidence is what wins for a few. Hours, the house felt safe again. Helen brewed chamomile tea, the steam carrying a faint honeyed sweetness as she sat at the table with Lily, talking about school, about college applications, about anything except Jason and Tara. For those moments, it was almost peaceful, but peace didn't last. The next morning, Helen stopped at the grocery store. She filled her cart with essentials, bread, coffee, fresh apples from the local farm stand. At checkout, she swiped her bank card. The machine beeped, then flashed an error. Declined, the cashier said apologetically, sliding the card back. Helen frowned, tried again. Same result. A sharp heat spread through her chest. Her account should have been fine, more than fine. The cashier shifted uncomfortably. Do you want to try another card? Helen's pulse hammered. She forced a polite smile, pulled out a second card, and completed the purchase. But the first card, the one tied to her checking account, still burned in her hand like a warning. She drove home without turning on the radio, the silence in the car thick as fog. When she reached the kitchen, she logged into her account online. Her breath caught. 3 withdrawals, one after another, thousands gone. Her account had been drained. The glow of the laptop screen lit Helen's face in the dim kitchen. She scrolled through her online banking history, her finger trembling slightly against the trackpad. 3 withdrawals glared back at her in coal black numbers. $1,200, $1,000, and another $1,000. Her breath caught. $3,200 siphoned from her checking in less than a week. Helen rubbed her temple, the faint lemon scent of the cleaner on the countertop rising as she leaned closer. It wasn't a mistake. She kept her accounts balanced like clockwork, old habits from her banking career. Numbers didn't lie. Someone had taken her money. She picked up the phone and called the bank. A cheerful automated voice shuffled her through menus before a representative answered. Mrs. Morris, the woman on the other end said after a pause. I see the transactions. They were processed through online banking. Same login as yours. Helen's grip on the phone tightened. Impossible. I didn't authorize those. Another pause, papers shuffling faintly in the background. Ma'am, the login came from a device registered in your profile. A laptop. Do you share your password with anyone? Her pulse thudded. Jason had helped set up her online account 2 years ago. He had insisted, said it would be easier if he knew the password, just in case. She hadn't argued then, but now the truth hit her like a slammed door. Helen's voice was calm, but her knuckles whitened against the phone. Lock the account. Freeze everything immediately. Yes, ma'am. Done. When the call ended, Helen sat in silence, her chest heavy with betrayal. The faint tick of the mantel clock seemed louder than ever. She dialed. Again, this time to Michael Abrams. He picked up quickly, his tone brisk. Michael, it's Helen. Jason's stolen from me. 3 withdrawals, over $3,000. The bank confirmed it came from my login. Michael's voice hardened. That qualifies as financial abuse. I'll draft a claim tonight. He won't just lose inheritance, he'll face criminal charges. Helen's breath steadied at his certainty. Do it, she said simply. When Lily arrived later that evening, dropping her backpack by the door, Helen debated whether to mention it. But Lily noticed her grandmother's tight expression almost immediately. What's wrong? The teenager asked, lowering her voice. Helen hesitated, then told her. Lily's face went pale, her eyes flashing with both anger and shame. Dad keeps saying it's his right, that everything you have should be his anyway. It makes me sick. Grandma Helen pulled the girl into a hug, the faint smell of Lily's strawberry shampoo wrapping around her. She pressed her cheek against Lily's hair and whispered, Don't let their cruelty stick to you. You're better than that. You always have been. Lily clung tighter. I hate how they treat you. Helen's throat ached, but her voice stayed steady. Let them hate. Let them take. Every move they make now is evidence, and evidence will win. They sat together in the living room until the sun dipped behind the trees, leaving the house awash in orange shadows. For a while, neither spoke. Helen sipped her tea, the warmth grounding her, while Lily doodled absent-mindedly in her notebook. The quiet between them wasn't empty. It was an unspoken vow. Later that week, Michael called again. His tone carried the crisp edge of progress. The petition is filed. Jason will be summoned for financial fraud. It's not civil anymore. It's criminal. Helen closed her eyes, letting the words settle. She had spent years swallowing her son's sharpness, smoothing his arrogance, hoping time would soften him. But now, the law itself was drawing the line she couldn't. The next morning, a knock rattled her front door. When she opened it, a courier in a navy jacket stood holding a thick envelope. He checked her name and handed it over. Inside, folded neatly beneath the seal of the court, was a summons. Jason Morris was officially being charged. Helen's hands trembled as she held the paper. Not from fear, but from the realization that finally, justice was no longer an idea. It was in motion. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee, a mix of formality and fatigue. Helen's shoes clicked softly against the tiled floor as she entered. Michael Abrams by her side, his leather briefcase swinging with calm precision. The weight of the summons still echoed in her chest, but walking through the wide double doors, she felt not fear, but a strange steadiness, as though every step forward was reclaiming ground Jason had stolen. Jason and Tara were already seated at the opposite table. Jason wore a sharp suit that looked borrowed, his jaw clenched as if holding back curses. Tara's expression was tight, her glossy hair falling perfectly in place, but her eyes betrayed nerves. The hum of whispered conversations floated through the room, punctuated by the shuffle of papers and the occasional cough. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Helen straightened her back, chin lifted, refusing to shrink the way she once did when Jason snapped at her. The gavel cracked, sharp as a gunshot, and proceedings began. Jason's lawyer, a man with a slick tie and a too-easy smile, was first to speak. Your Honor, this is nothing more than a family misunderstanding. A mother and son, perhaps miscommunicating about finances. My client never intended to harm his mother. Helen's lips twitched, a quiet laugh threatening but never leaving her throat. She glanced at Michael, who remained perfectly composed, waiting for his turn. Michael stood, his voice steady but cutting. Your Honor, this is not a misunderstanding. It's exploitation. We have documented withdrawals, access logs, and recorded calls proving intent. He clicked a small remote, and the courtroom projector flickered to life. Bank statements appeared on the screen, each withdrawal circled in red. Helen sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, but her heart hammered as the evidence played out in full view. The numbers looked harsher blown up against the screen, cold proof of Jason's theft. Michael then pulled out a small recorder, pressing play. Jason's voice filled the courtroom. Mom, could you cover gas for the next trip? Don't take it so personally. Tara's sharper tone followed. We're family. Family helps. The words, casual in her kitchen, now rang hollow under the courtroom lights. The gallery stirred, murmurs, whispers, even a few scoffs from those who didn't bother to hide their judgment. The judge leaned forward, peering over his glasses. This doesn't look like miscommunication, he said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of authority. This looks deliberate. Jason shifted in his chair, his jaw working furiously. Tara reached for his arm, but her touch looked more like desperation than support. Michael sat down, sliding the recorder back into his briefcase. Your Honor, we are filing for restitution and requesting that the court recognize this as financial abuse under state law. The judge nodded, making notes, the sound of his pen scratching loud in the hush. We'll proceed. Helen exhaled, the tension in her chest loosening slightly. She glanced at Lily, who sat quietly on the bench behind her. The girl leaned forward, squeezing Helen's hand with a strength that felt older than her years. You're winning, Grandma, Lily whispered, her breath warm against Helen's ear. Helen managed a small smile, though her eyes never left Jason. No, she whispered. Back. We're surviving. The hearing concluded with the judge setting a date for further proceedings. Tara shot up the moment the gavel fell, her heels clacking sharply as she stormed out, muttering under her breath. Jason followed, his shoulders hunched, his lawyer trailing behind with a stiff smile that no longer held confidence. Helen remained seated for a moment longer, letting the emptying courtroom surround her with quiet. She felt Lily's hand still wrapped in hers, warm and steady, the single reminder of loyalty in a room where betrayal had just been laid bare. As they stepped outside, Helen's phone buzzed. A new email notification blinked across the screen. Subject line sharp and cold. Jason Morris has filed to contest the will of Helen Morris. Helen froze on the courthouse steps, the autumn wind tugging at her sweater. She had won the day inside, but Jason had just opened a new battlefield. The courthouse air felt heavier this time, the murmur of the gallery laced with curiosity. People leaned into their benches, eager for spectacle. Jason sat stiffly at his table, his lawyer whispering rapidly in his ear. Tara perched beside him, lips pursed, her gaze cutting toward Helen like sharpened glass. Helen, by contrast, sat steady. Her palms rested against the smooth table surface, her state binder closed at her elbow. She wasn't here to plead. She was here to end this. Michael Abrams rose first. His tone carried calm authority, the kind that made listeners lean in without realizing. Your Honor, the contestant, Mr. Jason Morris, has filed to dispute Mrs. Morris's will. What he and his counsel have neglected to mention is the no contest clause embedded within that very will. By filing this petition, he has triggered it. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipping through the folder in front of him. His pen tapped once, twice. Mrs. Morris, did you knowingly include this clause? Helen met his eyes, her voice clear. Yes, I wanted it airtight. Michael slid a highlighted page forward. As you can see, Your Honor, the language is explicit. Any beneficiary who contests forfeits all rights to the estate. Jason Morris's petition has nullified his standing entirely. The words rippled across the courtroom like a dropped stone. Gasps, whispers, the faint shuffle of papers. Jason sputtered, color flooding his face. That's ridiculous. She can't just erase me. I'm her son. The judge's gavel cracked against the wood. Order. This court recognizes the clause as valid. By filing this contest, Mr. Morris has forfeited all claims, effective immediately. Jason's mouth hung open, his lawyer fumbling with papers that now meant nothing. Tara's glare shifted from Helen to Michael, her eyes narrow slits of fury. Helen leaned forward slightly, her voice steady, sharp enough to cut. You wanted control, Jason. What you got are consequences. Jason's fists clenched on the table. His lawyer leaned close, whispering frantically, but Jason shoved him away with a jerk of his shoulder. Tara's hand hovered near his arm, but he shook her off too. His face twisted with anger. On Helen's side, Lily beamed, her young face alight with a pride she could no longer contain. She leaned close, whispering in her grandmother's ear. Grandma, you beat them. You actually beat them. Helen turned her hand over, squeezing Lily's fingers. I didn't just beat them, she murmured. I signed them out of my life. The gavel fell again, ending the session. Jason and Tara stormed out of the courtroom, their footsteps loud against the marble floor. Helen didn't rise immediately. She let the room clear, savoring the silence left behind. The silence of victory, of boundaries finally carved into stone. As she gathered her things, Michael gave her a small nod. He played his hand too early. You won't have to worry about him touching a dime. Helen allowed herself a slow breath. The weight of the years she had spent making excuses for Jason, softening his selfishness, felt like it had evaporated. She wasn't just free of him financially, she was free of him emotionally. Outside, the autumn wind whipped against her face as she and Lily descended the courthouse steps. Reporters lingered at the bottom, microphones in hand, murmuring among themselves. Helen assumed they were waiting for another case, until one of them stepped forward, her badge swinging from her neck. Mrs. Morris, the reporter asked, we've heard about your case. Elder exploitation, family fraud, it's happening everywhere. Would you be willing to share your story? Helen paused, her binder heavy in her hands, Lily close at her side. She hadn't expected this. The fight had always been private, family against family. But now, her battle could mean something larger. The reporter's eyes were intent, waiting. Behind her, cameras hovered like hawks, ready to capture the moment. Helen felt the wind tug at her hair, the courthouse looming tall behind her. Her next move would decide whether this story remained a scar hidden in her own home, or became a weapon against every child who thought they could rob their parent and walk away untouched. The newspaper arrived early, folded tight in its thin plastic sleeve. Helen retrieved it from the porch, the cool morning air prickling her skin, and slid the bundle free. The ink smell was sharp, familiar, a reminder of mornings when she and her late husband used to read side by side over coffee. But today's paper was different. Her eyes landed instantly on the front page, bold headlines stretching across the fold. Retired banker outsmarts family exploitation. Beneath it, a photo. Helen, smiling faintly, standing beside Lily at the community center after last week's court session. Lily's arm was looped through hers, both of them framed by shelves of donated books and a bulletin board full of flyers. Helen's throat tightened, a rush of conflicting feelings flooding her: vindication, disbelief, pride, and something deeper, quieter, freedom. Inside, the article unfolded in clear, steady paragraphs. Local widow exposes financial abuse by own son. Court enforces no contest clause. Morris Travel Fund to benefit seniors across the county. Each line painted the truth she had carried silently for too long, now written in permanent ink. Lily shuffled into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Grandma," she murmured, then spotted the paper. "Is that us?" Helen turned the page so Lily could see. The teenager's tired face broke into a grin. "You look amazing. And it tells the truth. People will finally know what they did to you." Helen smoothed a hand over Lily's hair, her heart aching with gratitude. "What they did to us, sweetheart." By midday, the phone calls began. Old friends, neighbors, former colleagues from the bank. Some offered congratulations, others shared their own stories of neglect or exploitation. One voice cracked through the line, an elderly man who whispered, "You spoke for all of us." "Thank you." Helen's chest swelled with something she hadn't felt in years, purpose, but not everyone celebrated. By late afternoon, her phone rang again. Jason's name lit the screen. Against her better judgment, she answered. His voice exploded through the speaker. "You embarrassed me. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Helen kept her tone measured, almost serene. "No, Jason, you embarrassed yourself. I simply told the truth." In the background, Tara's sharper tone cut in, shrill with panic. "Everyone's laughing at us, Helen. Do you get that? People at Lily's school, at Jason's office, it's humiliating." Helen's lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. "Good, I'm finally laughing too." She ended the call before they could reply, setting the phone face down on the table. The silence afterward was golden, her breathing steady, her tea cooling untouched beside her. Evening settled slowly. The house glowed with the warm scent of baked apples, a comfort Lily insisted on making just because. Helen watched her granddaughter bustle in the kitchen, apron tied awkwardly around her waist, cheeks flushed from the ovens. Heat. They ate together at the small kitchen table, laughter softening the edges of the day. But as night fell, the story's impact spread further than Helen imagined. Jason sat alone in his office cubicle the next morning, colleagues whispering as he walked past. The headline had made its way into break rooms, forwarded emails, even group chats among clients. His phone buzzed with a message from his supervisor. "We need to talk. HR at 2:00. By the end of the day, Helen's phone buzzed again. This time, not Jason's number, but Lily's. Her voice trembled when Helen picked up. "Grandma, Dad lost his job. They fired him after they read the article." Helen stood in her living room, the paper still open on the coffee table, the headline bold under the lamplight. For a moment, she said nothing, letting the weight of the news settle. Jason had stolen her money, her trust, and her peace. Now, his own greed and arrogance had stolen his future. And for the first time in years, Helen felt the scales tip in her favor. The idea had started as a whisper in Michael's office, just a thought Helen had voiced almost in passing. But now, weeks later, it had become real. The Morris Senior Travel Fund was no longer a line in a document. It was a living thing, stamped on brochures, typed onto applications, and pinned proudly to a corkboard at the community center. Helen stood at a folding table draped with a navy cloth, stacks of glossy flyers neatly fanned out in front of her. The room hummed with chatter, the smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls filling the air as seniors milled about, clutching papers, laughing nervously, sharing stories of the places they still dreamed of seeing. Lily sat beside her with a laptop open, her nimble fingers typing as they finalized scholarship materials. "I made the application shorter," Lily said. "Less paperwork, more heart." "You said you wanted it to feel personal." Helen smiled, smoothing a flyer with her palm. "Exactly. This isn't about forms. It's about people finally getting to live." The first applicant, a widow named Marie, with a soft southern drawl, approached the table with tears in her eyes. "I've wanted to see the Grand Canyon my whole life. I thought it would never happen. Thank you for making it possible." She pressed Helen's hands between her own, warm and trembling. Helen's throat thickened. "You deserve more than being forgotten, Marie. Go see it. Stand at the edge and breathe it in for all of us later." A veteran with a cane leaned heavily on the table. I've never left the state. My late wife wanted to see the ocean. Maybe now I can. His voice cracked, but the pride in his eyes glowed. Helen clasped his hand firmly, her grip strong despite her years. This is how my money should move, not into the pockets of people who only see me as a burden, but into dreams that matter. Across the table, Michael nodded approvingly. He had come to oversee the legal side, but the sight of Helen among these applicants softened his usual lawyerly exterior. And rest assured, he added, setting down his briefcase, it's protected. Airtight. No one can touch what you've built here. Helen looked around the room, the folding chairs filled, the bulletin board covered in colorful maps, the seniors smiling as if youth had been returned to them. For the first time in years, her chest swelled, not with bitterness, but with pride. Lily leaned closer, her voice a quiet thread in the busy room. Grandma, this is your legacy. Not a fight with Dad, not court papers. This Helen turned to her granddaughter, her eyes shimmering. Then it's the only legacy I need. They stayed until dusk, packing away the last of the flyers as laughter echoed down the halls of the center. Helen carried the box to her car, the cool air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves. Her body ached, but it was a sweet ache, earned, not inflicted. Back home, the house greeted her with the quiet comfort of lamplight. She set the flyers on the table, poured herself a glass of water, and sank into her chair. Lily flopped onto the couch, scrolling through her phone, her smile lingering from the day's success. For once, everything felt aligned. Her decision, her strength, her purpose. And then came the knock. It was heavy, insistent, echoing through the walls. Helen froze, the glass cool in her hand. Lily looked up, her brow furrowing. Helen rose slowly, crossing the living room. Through the window, she saw the silhouette on the porch, shoulders slumped, posture defeated, yet unmistakable. Jason. His face, half lit by the porch light, looked hollowed out, desperate. His knuckles struck the door again. Mom, his voice cracked through the wood, raw and unfamiliar. Please, I need to talk. Helen's hand hovered over the doorknob, her chest tightening, not with fear, but with the weight of choice. Helen pulled the door open, cool night air rushing past her like a wave. Jason stood on the porch, shoulders slumped, eyes ringed with exhaustion. He looked smaller than she remembered, not the confident man who had once smirked while loading his SUV, but a hollow figure sagging under the weight of loss. Mom, he said, his voice frayed. Please, we're broke. Help me. The porch light etched harsh shadows across his face, exposing the stubble on his jaw, the sweat glistening at his temple. Behind him, Tara lingered at the foot of the steps, arms crossed, her expression equal parts fury and fear. Helen kept the door only half open, her hand steady on the frame. You drained my account. You tried to fight my will in court, and now you come here asking for help. Jason shifted forward, one hand raised in a helpless gesture. I lost my job because of that article. Tara's panicking. The bills are piling up. Just a loan, something to keep us afloat. Her eyes didn't soften. There was no space for me in your car, Jason, and now there's no space for you in my will. The words landed like stones. Jason flinched, his face crumpling as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. Tara's heels clicked against the stone walkway as she stepped closer, her voice sharp as a whip. You'll regret this, Helen. You've made a spectacle of us, and you'll pay for it. Helen's laugh was low, almost amused. Not half as much as you already are. Lily stood in the hallway behind Helen, silent but unblinking. The glow from the porch light caught her face, revealing not fear but pride. For once she wasn't caught between sides. She knew exactly where she stood. Jason opened his mouth as if to argue, but nothing came. Tara tugged at his sleeve, her jaw clenched, but Jason didn't resist. Slowly, heavily, he descended the steps, his movements sluggish, shoulders hunched. Helen waited until their silhouettes disappeared into the night before closing the door. The lock clicked, final and absolute. She turned to Lily, who was still watching, her arms crossed. The girl didn't speak, but her eyes told the story. Admiration, loyalty, and the unspoken relief of finally seeing her grandmother refuse to bend. Helen placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's have some tea." The rest of the evening passed in quiet comfort. The kettle hissed, steam curling into the warm kitchen air. They sipped from matching mugs, the sweetness of honey soothing their throats as the house held steady around them. Outside, the wind swept through the trees, but inside, peace finally took root. The next morning, a package arrived on the doorstep. Helen bent down and lifted the small box, its weight solid in her hands. Inside, cushioned in tissue paper, was a wooden plaque. The engraving caught the light as she traced it with her fingertips. The Morris Senior Travel Fund, in honor of Helen Morris, champion of resilience. The wood felt warm against her palm, as though it carried every thank you from the people whose lives it would touch. For years, Jason had made her feel invisible, but now her name would hang in community halls, in senior centers, in the homes of those who would finally see the world because of her. And there was nothing he could do to change it. The plaque sat proudly above the mantel now, framed by warm lamplight. Its polished surface reflected the room like a quiet sentinel. The Morris Senior Travel Fund, in honor of Helen Morris. Every time Helen passed, she caught the glint of her name, not as someone's mother or widow, but as a woman who had taken control of her story. Lily flopped onto the couch, tossing her phone aside. She studied the plaque for a long moment, then turned to her grandmother. "Your name will last longer than Dad's tantrums." Helen adjusted the position slightly, making sure it was perfectly level. That's the point. For years she had been defined by Jason, his needs, his demands, his judgments. Now her name was tied to something enduring, while his spiraled downward, forgotten or ridiculed. A week later, an envelope landed in her mailbox. She recognized Jason's handwriting instantly. The jagged strokes pressed into the paper like scars. She carried it inside, slid it open, and unfolded the letter. The words inside were venom, accusations, pleas tangled with blame. "You ruined me. You embarrassed me. You'll regret choosing strangers over your own blood." Helen read every word once, then calmly refolded the paper. She slid it back into the envelope, drew a heavy line across the front in thick black ink. "Return to sender." The marker bled slightly through the paper, staining Jason's name. She left it by the door for the postman, not sparing it another glance. That afternoon, Michael stopped by. He shed his coat at the entryway and stepped into the living room, his sharp eyes taking in the plaque, the neatness of Helen's desk, the steadiness in her posture. "You've done more than cut Jason out," Michael said, his tone a mix of admiration and certainty. "You've built something ironclad. He can rant, send letters, throw tantrums, but none of it touches this. Your legacy is sealed." Helen nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the plaque. "I built something strong," and erased what was weak. Michael gave a small smile, as if he'd expected nothing less. "It suits you." He left soon after, but his words lingered in the quiet house, like a benediction. That evening, Lily came home from school, tossing her backpack onto the floor. She joined Helen on the couch, leaning into her side. Her eyes, normally dulled by the chaos of her parents' arguments, now glowed with pride. "I still can't believe you did it," Lily said softly. "You didn't just fight back, you won. And you did it without becoming like them." Helen brushed a strand of hair from her granddaughter's face. "I didn't need to become like them. I just needed to stop letting them shape me." The fire crackled low in the fireplace, the scent of burning wood curling into the room. For a long time, neither spoke. They sat together, watching the flames, the plaque glowing faintly above them. Then Lily shifted closer, wrapping her arms around Helen with sudden fierceness, Her voice broke into a whisper, warm against Helen's ear. "You're not alone. You'll never be." Helen's breath caught. The words struck deeper than any courtroom victory, sharper than any signature on a page. She closed her eyes, her hand pressing over Lily's, and let herself believe it. For years, Jason had been the measure of her loneliness. Now Lily was the proof of her belonging. And Helen Morris knew with certainty. She hadn't just signed her son out of her future. She had signed herself into a life worth keeping. The bus hissed as it pulled into the station, its white sides streaked with dust from the highway. Helen stepped up onto the first stair, Lily right behind her, both carrying small bags instead of the heavy luggage that once weighed Helen down with expectation. The air inside smelled faintly of diesel and coffee, mixed with the chatter of travelers who buzzed with anticipation. They found seats by the window, the fabric worn but comfortable. Helen pressed her palm to the cool glass, watching the town blur away as the bus rumbled forward. For years she had stood still, waiting for invitations that never came. Now, with the Smoky Mountains as their destination, the motion itself felt like freedom. Lily leaned close, snapping a quick photo on her phone. "First trip without them," she said, her grin wide. "I'm posting this." #better company, Helen laughed, the sound surprising even herself. It had been years since laughter came without effort. She let Lily show her the pictures, the two of them shoulder to shoulder, the sunlight streaming across their faces. They didn't need polished SUVs or expensive hotels. The plastic seats and hum of the bus felt richer than any trip she'd missed. As the miles rolled past, they shared stories. Helen told Lily about her early days at the bank, the way she used to balance ledgers late into the night, the small victories that came from helping people build their lives. Lily responded with tales of school gossip, her college dreams, the friends who cheered when they saw the newspaper article about Helen's victory. At one point, Helen pulled out a sandwich she'd packed, the scent of mustard and pickles filling the air as she handed half to Lily. "This," she said, holding her piece aloft, "is the kind of space I wanted. With you." No one else. Lily's smile softened, her eyes shining. "You already gave me the best inheritance, Grandma." Helen tilted her head, amused. "Oh? And what's that?" "Strength," Lily said simply. "I'll never forget it." Helen's throat tightened, but she steadied her expression, nodding as if absorbing the words into her very bones. The bus rattled along, mountains rising faintly on the horizon, their blue-gray peaks promising a view worth every mile. When they finally arrived, the crisp air hit them first, cool, earthy, filled with the scent of pine and damp leaves. They stood together on an overlook, the Smokies stretching vast and endless before them. Helen inhaled deeply, the air filling her lungs with something sharper, cleaner than anything she'd felt in years. Lily snapped more photos, spinning in a circle. "Grandma, you can't tell me this doesn't beat the beach." Helen laughed again, her hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder. "It beats everything I left behind." Back home a week later, life carried a new rhythm. Letters of thanks from scholarship recipients began arriving in the mail. Widows who would see Paris, veterans who would walk beside oceans they'd only dreamed of. The local paper ran another story, this time with Helen's plaque front and center. Neighbors stopped her on the sidewalk, pressing her hands, telling her she had become a symbol of resilience. Helen accepted the praise politely, but she knew the true reward wasn't in the headlines. It was in the bus ride with Lily, the laughter, the photographs, the shared strength. One evening, as December crept in and the tree stood half-decorated in the living room, the mail arrived with an envelope tucked among the usual bills and cards. No return address, no signature. Just a plain Christmas card, generic and cold. Helen slid it open. Inside, the printed message read, "Merry Christmas." No handwriting, no name. But she didn't need a name to know who had sent it. Jason. She held the card in her hand, the tree lights flickering across her face, and felt the weight of silence heavier than words. The Christmas card lay on the coffee table, its glossy front glinting beneath the twinkle of the tree lights. The generic greeting inside, no signature, no handwriting, hung heavier than any insult Jason had ever thrown. Silence was his final weapon, and even that felt empty. Helen lifted the card between her fingers. The paper was cool, smooth, but meaningless. She walked to the fireplace, the scent of pine and cinnamon thick in the room, and tossed the card into the flames. The edges curled quickly, turning black, then orange, before collapsing into ash. The heat licked her skin, warm and final. Behind her, Lily rummaged through a box of ornaments. "Grandma, can you hand me the red glass one, the shiny one that catches the light?" Helen turned, her face softening. She passed it carefully, the ornament fragile but steady in her hand. Together, they hung it near the top of the tree, where it shimmered against the glow of white lights. The branches smelled of fresh pine, filling the room with a sweetness that wrapped around them like memory itself. "Beautiful," Helen said, stepping back. "No," Lily corrected gently, tilting her head toward her grandmother. "You're beautiful, Grandma. You didn't let them break you." Helen smiled faintly. She reached for another ornament, an old one Lily had made years ago. Construction paper bent, but still bright. It felt right, hanging it on the front of the tree, visible to anyone who walked through. The door, as they decorated, the mail arrived. Lily bounded to the door, scooping up a small stack of envelopes. Most were holiday cards, bright with glitter and scripted words, but one stood out. A thick letter with careful handwriting. Lily carried it over, curiosity gleaming. Helen slid it open and unfolded the paper. Inside was a handwritten note from a woman in her 70s who had just returned from a trip funded by the Morris Senior Travel Fund. Her words spilled with gratitude. "I stood on a beach in California and felt the ocean for the first time. You gave me that gift. I will never forget your name." Helen's breath caught. She set the letter carefully on the mantel, then found a frame and slid it inside. The glass caught the light, the words preserved like a promise. Lily read over her shoulder, her voice quiet. "They lost everything, Grandma." "You gained more." Helen touched the frame, her reflection faint in the glass. "Because I made space where it mattered." The tree sparkled in the corner, ornaments glinting, the room humming with warmth. Helen lowered herself into the armchair, the fire crackling beside her, the framed letter glowing above the mantel. Lily curled up on the couch, her presence a steady comfort. For the first time in years, Helen felt whole. Not defined by loss, not diminished by rejection, but built by choice, her own. She thought back to the driveway, to the sting of Jason's words, "There's no space in my car for you." The memory no longer cut deep. It had dulled, reshaped into fuel for everything she had built since. Helen let the fire's glow wash across her face as the truth crystallized in her chest. "My son refused to take me on a trip and said, 'There's no space in my car for you.' So I made sure there was no space for him in my will."